Daniel had never imagined that life could turn so quickly against him. For years he had worked honestly, believing that hard work always brought reward. But sometimes life did not follow simple rules. One wrong decision led to another, and slowly his small business began to fall apart. First came a slow season, then a late payment to suppliers, and soon everything was slipping out of his hands. It was like watching a house he had built with his own hands collapse one brick at a time. He tried everything, extra jobs, selling tools, borrowing from friends, but nothing was enough. His debts kept growing, and the people he owed money to were no longer patient. They began sending him messages that made his stomach twist with worry. Some called him a liar. Others warned him that he had only a little time left before they took serious action. Daniel had never been in trouble before, and now he felt surrounded. Every night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where he went wrong. His small apartment felt colder each day. The unpaid bills stacked on his table like silent reminders of his failure. He was tired, ashamed, and afraid to answer the phone. He didn't want to let anyone down, but he didn't know how to fix his life anymore. The weight of everything made his chest feel heavy, and sometimes he would sit quietly for hours, thinking about how quickly life could change. One evening, when he walked through the town center searching for a part-time job, he came across an old notice board near a bus stop. It was usually filled with simple things: grocery store sales, job offers, lost pets. But that day, a small, neatly written advertisement caught his eye. It looked different from the rest, as if someone had placed it there with great care. Widow seeking companionship and assistance. A marriage of convenience. Shelter, food, and fair partnership provided. Quiet life on a farm. Details available upon contact. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. His first reaction was disbelief. Who placed such an ad in modern times? It sounded like something from an old story, not real life. But then he noticed the handwriting: steady, polite, not desperate. It didn't look like a scam or a joke. It felt sincere. He folded the small slip of paper containing the contact details and walked home slowly, the words repeating in his mind. A marriage of convenience? It was unusual, unexpected, and something he never thought he would consider. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he realized he had very little left to lose. His debts were drowning him. His apartment might be taken soon, and he had no family left to turn to. That night he sat at his table, staring at the slip of paper. Hours passed. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was risky. But maybe, just maybe, it was a chance to start over. A strange chance, but still a chance. Finally, when the clock approached midnight, he picked up his phone and dialed the number. The call connected after 2 rings. A calm female voice answered, soft but steady. Hello? Daniel hesitated. My name is Daniel. I saw your advertisement today. There was a pause on the other end, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. Thank you for calling, the woman replied. My name is Evelyn. Her voice carried a quiet strength, the kind that made him sit a little straighter without even thinking. She invited him to meet her the next morning if he wanted to hear more about the arrangement. There was no pressure in her tone, no urgency. She spoke as if she already understood that people came to her only when life had pushed them into difficult corners. Daniel agreed. The next morning he traveled to the outskirts of town, where the roads became quieter and trees stood tall on either side. He had never been to that part of the region before, and each mile made him feel as if he were moving farther away from his problems, even though deep down he knew they would follow him until he faced them. When he arrived at the farm, he saw a wide stretch of golden fields, an old wooden barn, and a large farmhouse with a red roof. The place looked peaceful, almost too peaceful for someone like him who carried storms inside his mind. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch as he approached. She was in her late 30s, with hair tied loosely behind her, and a simple dress that made her look both strong and gentle. Her eyes studied him carefully but kindly, as if she wanted to understand who he was without making him uncomfortable. Thank you for coming, she said. Daniel nodded, feeling strangely nervous. Thank you for receiving me. They sat on the porch, and she explained her situation with calm honesty. She had lost her husband 2 years ago in a sudden illness, and since then the farm had been too large for her to manage alone. She had no children, and her relatives lived far away. Running the land required more than one pair of hands, and she did not want to sell the farm because it carried her husband's memory and years of their shared work. She didn't want a romantic relationship. She wanted partnership, respect, cooperation. The marriage, if agreed, would be practical a way for both of them to survive and rebuild something meaningful. Daniel listened carefully, surprised by her straightforwardness. She was not desperate, nor was she trying to hide anything. She spoke with honesty and strength, and he found himself respecting her instantly. Before giving his answer, she asked him one question. "Why did you call?" Daniel looked down at his hands. For a moment he wanted to hide the truth, but something about her calm presence made him speak honestly. "I am in debt," he said softly. "I worked hard, but things went wrong. I don't have a way out anymore. I'm not trying to run from responsibility, I just don't know how to manage everything alone." Evelyn didn't react with shock or judgment. She simply nodded. "I appreciate your honesty," she said. "Life is unpredictable. Sometimes we need help in ways we never imagined." Her understanding felt like a warm light in a dark room. Daniel felt his throat tighten for a moment. This was the first time in months that someone had spoken to him without suspicion or blame. She told him to take his time before deciding. But Daniel didn't need time. He had already decided. He told her he would accept the arrangement and work hard to support the farm and earn his place there. Evelyn gave a small nod, as if she had expected that answer. The rest of the day they walked around the property. She showed him the fields, the barn, the old tractor that needed repairs, and the animals that needed daily care. Daniel listened to every detail, imagining himself living this life. It was different from anything he had known, but it felt real and grounding. When the sun began to set, Evelyn offered him a room in the house. He could move in the following week. Daniel felt a mix of relief and uncertainty, but he accepted. For the first time in a long while, he went to sleep feeling that tomorrow might not be as heavy as yesterday. As night fell over the farm, Daniel stood by the window of his temporary room. The sky was full of stars, quiet and wide. He told himself that this was just a temporary escape, just a way to get his life under control. But deep in his heart, he also felt a small spark of hope, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't know then that this decision would change his life in ways he could never imagine. He didn't know that he would soon feel a sense of belonging, responsibility, and quiet courage growing inside him. He only knew that he had taken a step forward, away from fear and toward a future he could rebuild. And so, with tired eyes and a hopeful heart, Daniel accepted the strange, unexpected path life had placed before him. Daniel moved into the farmhouse a week later, carrying only a few bags and a quiet hope that things would finally get better. Everything around him felt new and unfamiliar: the wide open fields, the silence of the countryside, the creaking wooden floors inside the farmhouse. It was so different from the noisy apartment he had lived in for years. Here, the air smelled fresh, and the nights were peaceful, yet he still felt a nervous knot inside his stomach. After all, he was living in a stranger's home, and they had agreed to something most people would never understand. Evelyn welcomed him politely but remained careful with her emotions. She was kind, but her kindness had boundaries, as if she had built walls around her heart after losing her husband. Daniel could see that she was not cold. She was simply protecting herself. She had been through enough pain already. Their first days working together were quiet. They woke up early each morning, shared simple breakfasts, and walked out to the fields. Evelyn would explain what needed to be done, and Daniel would listen closely, trying to remember every instruction. He didn't want to disappoint her. He wanted to prove that he was not a burden, that he could be useful and responsible. Though Daniel had never worked on a farm before, he learned quickly. His hands were used to hard work, and the physical labor gave him a strange kind of comfort. Each day he repaired something: small fence posts, broken handles, loose hinges, and each small success made him feel a little stronger inside. The farm felt alive, and he wanted to help keep it that way. Sometimes, while working, he would notice Evelyn watching him from a distance. Not in a suspicious way, but with a thoughtful curiosity. She seemed surprised by his determination. Perhaps she had expected someone less willing to work, someone only looking for shelter. But Daniel wanted to earn his place. He didn't want to feel like he was hiding from his problems. He wanted to contribute, to feel useful again. One afternoon, after a long morning fixing an old tractor, Daniel sat under the shade of a tree to catch his breath. Evelyn walked over with 2 glasses of cold water. She handed him one and sat beside him, not too close, but closer than before. "You learn fast," she said softly. Daniel smiled a little. "I just try to listen well. I don't want to make things harder for you." "You're not making anything harder," she replied. "I appreciate your effort." Those simple words warmed Daniel more than he expected. It had been a long time since anyone acknowledged his hard work without judgment or sarcasm. Slowly, the atmosphere between them began to shift. They talked more about small things, like the weather, the growing crops, or memories of the place. Evelyn shared stories about her late husband, how they built the farm together, how they dreamed of expanding it. Daniel listened respectfully, understanding that her memories were precious. Sometimes, her voice would soften when she spoke about the past, and Daniel sensed a quiet sadness that still lived inside her. He never asked too many questions, and she respected that. Their conversations were gentle, unforced, and honest. They were 2 people with broken histories, learning how to breathe again in the same quiet space. At night, they often ended up sitting on the porch, watching the sky turn orange, pink, and then deep blue. The silence between them became comfortable. It no longer felt awkward. It felt peaceful. Daniel found himself looking forward to those moments, but his past was never fully silent. Every few days, he would receive a letter or a message from the people he owed money to. Sometimes the letters were polite reminders, but other times, they carried threats that made his hands shake when he opened them. He tried hiding his reaction, not wanting to worry Evelyn. But she was observant. She noticed when he became quiet, or when he took long walks alone at night. One evening, as Daniel stood beside the barn looking troubled, Evelyn approached him gently. "I can see something is bothering you," she said. Daniel hesitated, then finally told her the truth about the messages. He didn't want to hide anything from her. She listened quietly, her face calm, her eyes soft. "You're not alone here," she said after a moment. "If you need support, we can face things together." Her words touched him deeply. He had expected worry or frustration, but instead she offered understanding. It made Daniel feel less like an outsider and more like someone she was starting to trust. One morning, while Daniel was feeding the animals, a neighbor named Mr. Harris stopped by. He was friendly but spoke in a teasing tone. "So, you're the new husband?" he asked with a grin. Daniel felt awkward, but before he could answer, Evelyn walked out of the barn. "He's my partner in running the farm," she said calmly, correcting the man's assumptions without hesitation. Daniel noticed the respect in her tone. She did not treat him like a temporary helper or a stranger. She treated him like someone who mattered on the farm. That simple act made Daniel feel a quiet sense of belonging. As weeks passed, Daniel grew stronger, both in body and mind. The tasks that once seemed difficult became part of his routine. He rose before sunrise, ready to face the day. He no longer felt lost or weak. The farm gave him purpose, and Evelyn's presence gave him stability. The 2 of them began to rely on each other in small ways. Evelyn trusted Daniel with important tasks, and he trusted her with the truth of his struggles. They weren't a traditional couple, and they didn't pretend to be. But what they were building together felt real, something based on respect, patience, and shared responsibility. Sometimes Daniel caught himself thinking about the future, trying to imagine what life on the farm might look like a year from now. Would he still be here? Would their partnership grow stronger? He wasn't sure. But for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. even though he knew his debt still existed. He no longer felt like he was facing everything alone. One peaceful night, after finishing a long day of work, Daniel and Evelyn sat on the porch as a cool breeze blew across the fields. Fireflies glowed between the trees, and the distant sound of crickets filled the air. It was one of those evenings that made the world feel still. Evelyn looked out into the distance and said softly, "I'm glad you came here, Daniel." Her words were quiet, but they carried meaning that reached straight into his heart. He turned to her, surprised and grateful. "I'm glad I did too," he said honestly. They weren't smiling like people in a romantic story. Instead, they shared a small, understanding look, two people who had struggled in different ways, now finding strength in each other's presence. Life on the farm wasn't easy. There were days when the weather was rough, when tools broke, when crops looked weak. But every challenge made Daniel more determined. He wanted to protect the farm that had given him a second chance, and though he didn't say it out loud, he wanted to protect Evelyn too. She had given him trust at a time when he didn't trust himself. As the days blended into weeks, Daniel felt a quiet transformation happening inside him. He was still the same man who had come to the farm with heavy debts and worries. But now, there was something different in his eyes. Something stronger. Something steady. He didn't realize that this strength would soon be tested, or that the peace they had built together would face shadows neither of them expected. But for the moment, life was simple, steady, and almost peaceful. And in that peacefulness, something unspoken began to grow between Daniel and Evelyn. A bond formed not by romantic promises, but by shared days, shared struggles, and the calm understanding that neither of them had to face life alone anymore. Daniel had begun to feel that his life was finally settling into a rhythm. Each day on the farm brought new tasks, new challenges, and small victories that made him feel useful again. He and Evelyn worked side by side, and their quiet conversations had grown more natural. He still received letters from creditors, but somehow, the farm gave him enough strength to face them with a clearer mind. But peace, he would learn, never stays forever. It happened one late afternoon when Daniel was repairing the fence near the edge of the property. He heard the sound of a car engine approaching, louder than anything that usually came down the country road. When he looked up, he saw a black car slowly rolling toward the gate. A feeling of unease washed over him, though he couldn't yet explain why. Two men stepped out of the car. They were strangers to this peaceful countryside, well-dressed, sharp-eyed, and out of place among the quiet fields. Daniel's heart began to pound. He knew exactly who they were. One of the men approached him with a stiff smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Daniel," he said smoothly, as if they were old friends. "You've been difficult to find." Daniel swallowed hard. His hands shook slightly, though he tried to hide it. "We need to talk," the man continued. "You owe money, a lot of it." Daniel felt the old shame rising inside him, the painful reminder of his past mistakes. He looked down at the ground. "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm trying to fix things." The second man stepped closer, his tone sharper. "Trying isn't enough. Your time is up." The words hit Daniel like a heavy weight. He opened his mouth to explain, but before he could speak, Evelyn appeared from behind the fence. She had been checking the field on the other side and had come to see why strangers were at her gate. "Is everything all right?" she asked calmly. Her presence made Daniel even more nervous. He didn't want her to be involved. He didn't want her to see this part of his life, the part he had hoped would fade away. But the men turned to her with polite smiles. "We're just here to speak with Daniel," one of them said. Evelyn glanced at Daniel, waiting for an explanation. He lowered his head. "They're from the company I owe money to," he said quietly. His voice was a mix of fear and embarrassment. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "We'll be back," one of the men added, looking directly at Daniel. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." They left as quietly as they had arrived, but the silence they left behind felt heavy and cold. Evelyn approached Daniel gently. "You should have told me," she said. Not in anger, but in concern. "I didn't want to bring trouble here," he replied, his voice tight. "This is your home. I didn't want my past to disturb your life." Evelyn took a slow breath. "Daniel, this farm is not just mine anymore. You work here. You live here. That means your problems matter too." Her words made Daniel feel both grateful and guilty. He felt like he had disappointed her, even though she didn't say so. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the moonlit window. The peace he had found here now felt fragile. Those men had the power to ruin everything: his life, his progress, the farm's calm. He feared they might come back with even more pressure. The next morning, he tried to work as usual, but Evelyn could see the worry written all over his face. After a long silence, she finally said, "Daniel, avoiding the problem won't make it disappear." "I know," he whispered, "but I don't know if I can face it alone." "You're not alone," she replied softly. Those words stayed with him all day. A few days later, the men returned, this time more forcefully. They walked directly into the driveway without waiting for an invitation. Their tone was sharper, their patience thinner. "We need the payment," one of them demanded. "If you don't have it, there will be consequences." Evelyn stepped forward before Daniel could respond. "This is private property," she said firmly. "You cannot come here and intimidate someone." Her voice was calm but strong, and for a moment the men hesitated. But then the second man said in a low, threatening tone, "Your farm might not stay yours forever if Daniel doesn't settle his debts. These things have a way of affecting everything." That subtle hint sent a chill down Daniel's spine. He clenched his fists. "Leave now," Evelyn said, her eyes unwavering. The men exchanged glances, then left, though their expressions made it clear they would not stop returning. After they were gone, Daniel felt crushed under the weight of guilt. "I've brought danger to your home," he said, voice thick. "You trusted me, and now this." "Stop," Evelyn said gently but firmly. "You're not responsible for their behavior. You're trying to fix your life. That takes courage." Her kindness hit him harder than any harsh word could have. It made him feel seen, understood, and somehow even more determined. Later that night, Daniel made a decision. He didn't want to run anymore. He didn't want to hide behind fear or let others threaten Evelyn's peace. She had opened her home to him, trusted him, allowed him a fresh start. He couldn't let his past destroy that. He decided to take action. The next morning, he sat with a notepad, listing everything he owned that he could sell. He didn't have much, but he was ready to let go of anything if it helped. Then he thought of people he knew, old friends, co-workers, anyone who might help him find extra work or offer advice. He made calls, wrote messages, and arranged part-time jobs in nearby towns. He even reached out to the debt company directly, requesting a formal meeting. He wanted to negotiate instead of being threatened. It wasn't easy. They weren't kind. But Daniel held his ground. He explained his willingness to pay every bit he owed, even if it took time. At first, the company refused. But Daniel kept showing up, kept speaking calmly, kept insisting. After several meetings, they finally agreed to a structured repayment plan. It wasn't perfect, and it would take a long time. But it was something he could manage. Evelyn noticed the change in him. His steps became firmer, his eyes more focused. He walked with purpose, instead of fear. She never told him how proud she was, but he could see it in her expressions, small, warm glances that told him she believed in him. But their struggles were not over. Word spread in the nearby town that the farm might be in trouble. A few people, hearing rumors, tried to convince Evelyn to sell the land at a low price. They pretended to be helpful, but Daniel sensed their intentions clearly. They wanted the land for themselves. This made him even more determined to protect the farm, not only because it was their home, but because he understood how much it meant to Evelyn. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Daniel finally said what he had been feeling for weeks. "I won't let anyone take this place from you," he said quietly. "You trusted me when no one else did. I won't forget that." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes warm but tired. "You don't have to carry everything alone." "Maybe not," he replied, "but I want to help carry it." For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to truly smile, not a polite smile, but a gentle, thankful one. And in that moment, Daniel felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just trying to escape his past anymore. He was fighting for something greater: respect, purpose, and the home that had given him hope again. The shadows of his past had arrived, threatening everything he was building. But instead of running, he stood firm. And this time, he wasn't fighting only for himself. He was fighting for Evelyn, for the farm, and for the life they were slowly creating together. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Daniel had ever faced, yet they were also some of the most meaningful. Every day felt like a test of his strength, his loyalty, and his courage. But he refused to step back. He had made a promise to himself and, though unspoken, a promise to Evelyn too. He would not let the farm fall. He would not let fear rule him again. The repayment plan he had negotiated was strict, leaving him with almost no free income. Still, he accepted it without hesitation. To make the payments, Daniel took small jobs in nearby towns: repair work, loading supplies, cleaning workshops, anything honest that earned a little money. Most nights he came home tired, shoulders sore and clothes dusty, but he never complained. Evelyn, seeing his effort, tried to take some pressure off him. She cooked warm meals, shared part of the workload, and managed the finances of the farm carefully so that every expense was handled with attention. She didn't say it aloud, but she had begun to rely on Daniel in ways she never expected. His presence brought balance. His determination brought hope. One morning, while they were tending to the vegetable garden, Evelyn said softly, "You're working too hard, Daniel." He shook his head. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "There's a difference between doing what's needed and forgetting to rest," she replied. "I don't want you to break yourself for this." Daniel paused, leaning on his shovel. "If I don't work hard, everything will fall apart." "Not everything," she said gently. "You have me. We're a team." Her words touched him more deeply than she realized. For years he had handled his failures alone. Now, for the first time, someone stood beside him, not to judge, but to support. It made him want to push even harder. But it also reminded him that he didn't have to suffer silently. Despite their efforts, rumors in the nearby town continued. Some people whispered that the farm wouldn't survive. Others tried to take advantage of the situation by offering to buy the land cheaply. Evelyn usually ignored such talk, but Daniel could see it weighed on her. She didn't want to lose the legacy her late husband had built with her. She didn't want to see the land fall into hands that didn't value its history. One afternoon, as Daniel delivered a repaired tool set to a neighbor, he overheard two men talking at the shop. "That widow won't last another season," one of them said. "She should sell before the place collapses." "She won't," the other replied with a laugh. "Not while that man she married is still hanging around." So, Daniel felt a burning sensation in his chest, not anger, but a heavy sadness. People saw him as a burden or a temporary solution. They didn't understand how much the farm meant to him now. They didn't know how hard he was trying. But instead of reacting, he simply left the place quietly. He had learned that actions mattered more than arguments. That evening, he returned home later than usual. Evelyn noticed his silence immediately. "Is something wrong?" she asked, serving him dinner. "Nothing serious," Daniel answered, forcing a smile. "Just a long day." But Evelyn didn't believe him. She had learned to read his expressions well. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." Daniel lowered his gaze. "People think you should sell the farm. They say it will fall apart." Evelyn's expression remained calm. "I've heard things like that before." "They don't understand how much it means to you," he said quietly. "Do you understand?" she asked. Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes. "Yes," he replied. "I understand." A warm silence settled between them. In that moment, neither of them needed to say more. The next major challenge came when autumn arrived. The crops were ready for harvest, but the workload was huge. The two of them couldn't handle it alone. Daniel reached out to neighbors, asking for temporary help. Many refused, but a few kind people agreed. Together they gathered the crops slowly and steadily. Daniel worked from sunrise to sunset, pushing past his fatigue. Evelyn also worked tirelessly, carrying baskets, sorting produce, and managing storage. One evening, when they were finally done for the day, Evelyn nearly stumbled from exhaustion. Daniel caught her quickly. "You need rest," he said with concern. "And you?" she said, breathing heavily. "You've worked twice as hard. I'll rest when you do," he replied with a small smile. She smiled back, though tired, and that tiny moment of connection made all the hard work feel worth it. The harvest was successful, better than they expected. For the first time in months, they felt a sense of relief. The farm would survive another season, but their relief did not last long. A week later, the two men from the debt company returned, this time with stricter demands. They claimed Daniel's payments were not enough and threatened legal action. Their tone was harsh, louder than before, and their presence disrupted the peace of the farm. Evelyn stepped forward before Daniel could speak. "We have followed the agreement," she said firmly. "You have no right to come here and intimidate him." The men did not argue directly with her, but they continued to pressure Daniel. Evelyn, seeing Daniel struggle to remain calm, finally said, "Leave now. And next time, speak through official channels, not at our doorstep." Her choice of words surprised the men. They gave Daniel one last warning, then left. Daniel felt angry, not angry at Evelyn, but at himself. He hated that she had to see this, that she had to protect him from people who held power over his past. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "For what?" she asked. "For bringing this trouble into your life." Evelyn took a step closer. "Daniel, trouble does not define a person. How they face it does." He looked at her silently, taking in her strength. She had lost her husband, carried the weight of the farm alone, and still managed to stand firm in every storm. Her courage inspired him more than anything else. From that day forward, Daniel changed the way he approached everything. He no longer worked only to repay his debt. He worked to protect the life they were building. He took extra jobs not out of fear, but out of determination. He repaired fences, cleaned barns, and planted crops with renewed purpose. He used evenings to study farming techniques, wanting to become better for the sake of the land and for Evelyn. Over time, the community's view of him changed. People noticed his dedication. They saw him helping others even when he was tired. They saw him stand beside Evelyn during farmers' meetings, supporting her decisions with quiet confidence. Slowly, the whispers faded. Some even began to admire the partnership they saw between Daniel and Evelyn, simple, steady, built on trust. Months passed, and the farm flourished. The fields grew healthy. The barn stood stronger, and the farmhouse felt warmer than before. Daniel and Evelyn developed a connection that, while not romantic in the traditional sense, grew deeply meaningful. They understood each other without many words. They shared laughter after long days, shared quiet evenings watching the sunset, and shared responsibilities without questioning each other's commitment. One winter evening, as snowflakes drifted softly outside, Daniel sat by the fire, warming his hands. Evelyn joined him with 2 cups of tea. They sat together in silence for a while, enjoying the peaceful crackle of the fire. "You've changed this place," Evelyn said softly. Daniel shook his head. "This place changed me. You've given the farm new life," she continued. "And you've given me something too." Daniel looked at her curiously. "What?" "Hope," she said with a gentle smile. Daniel felt a warm pressure in his chest. "You gave that to me first." The fire flickered softly between them, and the warmth in the room grew deeper, not from the flames, but from the understanding they shared. Their marriage had started as an agreement, a practical arrangement to survive difficult times. But what they built together turned into something far more meaningful, a partnership rooted in respect, loyalty, and quiet care. They had no need for grand declarations or dramatic moments. Their bond showed itself in everyday actions. Shared meals, hard work, kind words, steady support. Daniel's debt was still being paid little by little, But fear no longer shadowed his steps. He walked with confidence, now a man rebuilding himself with patience and determination. And Evelyn, who once lived with sorrow in her eyes, now carried calm strength and a steady sense of peace. The farm, once struggling, now thrived. The fields stretched wide with promise. The house felt alive again, and through every season, Daniel and Evelyn stood side by side, not because they were bound by romance, but because they had chosen to protect each other's dignity, dreams, and futures. Together, they proved that a broken past could be rebuilt, that trust could grow where there was once only survival, and that two people, brought together by chance, could create something lasting and hopeful. And as the winter wind blew gently outside, they sat quietly by the fire, two souls who had rescued each other without ever planning to.